Good afternoon. We sure are glad you all are here. It is only fitting at this bittersweet time of transition that we spend a few minutes looking back at many of the opportunities, challenges, and accomplishments since Wes and his wonderful family answered the call to be our rector at Transfiguration 7 years ago. It didn't take long, though, for Wes to settle in and get down to business. He invited the congregation, I think some of you may remember, to a Saturday morning meeting to get to know him better. He shared his background with us, and then he brought out this flip chart.
I don't remember any of this.
Oh.
That's because you're getting old.
You're singing the theme song here. He brought out a flip chart and a marker, and he asked us, what did we expect of him as a minister? You don't remember this?
No memory whatsoever. I think I probably didn't listen. Obviously.
I gotta change that.
Didn't make an impact.
By the time we finished with him, he had 3 pages of a giant flip chart.
That sounds about right.
Well, it was your handwriting that made it 3 pages. But you stepped, after those 3 pages, you stepped back and said, clearly, how many people are you going to need to do this job? And it was a rhetorical question, but he realized he was the only one here. But one of the most significant statements that he made that day was that he wanted to help us if he possibly could, but we would have to do our part. We would have to let him know what we wanted. And he gave us an example, that if you were in the hospital, he would not rush down to see you unless you had told him that you would like for him to come. And so it's part of our responsibility to let him know that.
Not FaceTime.
Wes, that's not for you. More about this later. One of his best qualities we discovered early on was his dry sense of humor. Jocelyn Watkins, who's not here today with us, she's in Charlotte. She couldn't come in, she's going to have a little surgery on Tuesday. But she wrote a note that said she enjoyed your sense of humor because it provided a real comfort level for easy conversation. I think all of us would agree with that. We quickly learned, though, of his age sensitivity.
You're all age sensitive.
That is his sensitivity to our age, which he simply defined as old. And it became a recurrent theme throughout his days with us. Even to not too long ago when he called us, he didn't call us sheep, he called us goats, he called us old goats. You could tell he was on short time then. But he'd take great pleasure in reinforcing this fact that we were old, and I guess he was saying he was not. And he said, it's the truth. So I guess he figured we didn't know that, or maybe we didn't remember. My first experience with this was at Cursillo in Black Mountain, which Wes was also attending at the time. Do you remember this?
I remember Cursillo. Yeah, I do remember that.
Well, that's a good thing. Your mind's not completely gone yet. At the first session, they asked everyone to stand up, state their name, and tell them why they were there at Cursillo. Most everybody stood up and answered. They told their name and answered something like, to grow as a Christian or to deepen my relationship with Christ. And when they got to Wes, however, he introduced himself and said the reason he was here was obvious when you looked around, because he was there to reduce the average age.
I do not.
And we have an age problem, right? We have a serious memory problem. All you have to do, I think, is look around at our church buildings and grounds and see the many improvements that have taken place during Wes's tenure, from new roofs, even on our shed back here. New windows, HVAC that has saved us a substantial amount of money each year. The rectory becoming a multi-purpose building for several ministries, a children's chapel, thanks to Laura. And Kelly. Our nursery and a meeting place for our community group. Another phenomenal accomplishment was our church. Wes began conversations with the former owner in his early years here, just to let him know that we might be interested if he ever wanted to sell it. And although there are no definite plans at this point in time, this gift will provide our church opportunities to serve God in this community in the future. So thank you, Wes, for your foresight. Nancy and Tom Scott, I'm sorry to say, are stuck in Florida with some parental responsibilities, so they couldn't be here. But they sent words that said they're sad not to be able to be part of your celebration. You have been a tremendous source of light and joy. As junior warden, I appreciate your guidance and direction in caring for our beautiful little church. I know there were many things that you took care of on your own, and I thank you. I pray nothing goes wrong with the sump pump during the rest of my term as junior warden. Aha! This is from Tom and Nancy. Says, we wish you the best of luck and may the light of Christ go with you on your journey. There was a lot of work done on their grounds as well. I think Mike Boff remembers one of those opportunities.
Well, I still remember giving Patrick and I a nice long lecture on how you are the shepherd of your flock. And as you sat in the excavator, in this nice cushy seat, moving this little joystick around, while Patrick and I were down in the mud with our hand shovels trying to dig out the ditch over here, he kept saying, just remember, I am the shepherd.
I don't think that's true. As I tell my kids, if you want the easy job, you need to become skilled labor. That works.
Mike, I remember it just as you told it.
A recent change to our grounds was the removal of the tall trees. If you look out these windows, we had tall trees in the spiritual garden growing up right against the building. And they were about, I think they were just about up to the sky because they were so tall. And several of us who worked in the spiritual garden had gotten together and thought, I think it really might look a whole lot better if we just took those down and not have to replace them, or we might, but let's see, I wonder what that would look like. We'd really like that to be done. And Wes happened to hear that conversation. So that was like late morning. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, we get a text and a picture. And guess what the picture is? No trees. Not only were they gone, there wasn't a trace of them. It was all put back, mulched beautifully, and it just, we just think it looks so much better, and we thank you for that. Remember I said a few minutes ago, you have to ask him? Well, we asked and we received. There was one day, though, that you needed to install a new church sign. And at the bottom of the driveway, and I think our resident storyteller extraordinaire, Joe Carter, has this to tell.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll stand up and I promise I'll talk loud.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But we were, it's the new sign with the blue Episcopalian down here. And we had talked about it for a while. And we had used this company in Asheville, Cheadle Sign Company. They did our sign. So they gave us, I thought, a good price on it. We had to install it ourselves, though, just to save a little money. And I think Mike Boff was there, Patrick, maybe Chuck Watkins. There might have been some other people I thought of his name out here earlier.
Chuck Haley.
Chuck Haley, I think, might have been there as well. But we were basically just digging some holes with the post hole diggers and getting it level and all, chucking some big rocks to hold it in place, and then pouring this mixed mortar concrete down in there. And we had some of that water left over and sitting in a pickup truck there by the sign. We were finished. I remember it was Father West's birthday, and he was leaned up against the back of the truck like this, and I climbed up in the truck, and they were all still talking. Even the kids, they still talk about it to this day, but nobody said anything, even though they could tell what I was getting ready to do. So I picked up that 5-gallon bucket of water, which is not quite full, but I dumped it on Father West, and then I was younger then. So I jumped out of the truck, threw the bucket, and I ran up to the graveyard, and nobody was chasing after me, so I decided to be very remorseful and kind of ease my way back down. And I think he only hit me 3 times. Remember, I still got a scar. No, that was from a car accident. And is that all you have for me? There's a couple of other things I could talk about if you want.
No, I don't think that would be
We'll get
wise.
back to you on that. Thank you, Joe. Wes has put together different services for this church that appealed not only just to us, but attracted visitors from the community, besides the police. Wes's sermons were always well received. His ability to share the gospel and apply it to today's world, and in such a way when you left the service to go home, you were sure that Wes was talking just to you in that sermon. He always had a way of ending many of his sermons with a question for you to think about. And one example that I recall was after his sermon on spiritual gifts, he ended the sermon with a question, and what are you doing with your spiritual gifts? So we put the ball back in our courts, which is what we need when we leave church to go home during the week. Jocelyn Watkins is fine and in Charlotte, and she sends her best. She could not be here, but she sends this tribute from herself and from Chuck. She got some divine communication from Chuck, her husband who passed away several years ago. She said, "We really appreciated your sermons and Bible studies and the amount of reading and work that went into it." Of course, Bible study for the adults with Wes was cherished by many who attended. Carl Nelson has something to say about this.
You really come to represent all the old people who you've been picking on for so long.
I saw how slow you got up.
Some of the stories have been told, but the one that slips by most of us every service, and it's part of the service. He says, please get up if you can, if you're able. Now, we kind of omitted that one, but if you think about it, he grins every time he says it. Well, an organization and a church has need of the right person at the right time. We're lucky, we're gifted. We had 2. We had a twofer. And Laura has come as part of that package. She is a follower of St. Francis, who says nothing. He just gets the work done, and if necessary, speaks. Now, Wes likes to talk. He likes to rib us a lot. But he's going to leave us in a good place. We were not in the best place when Wes got here, but he's leaving us in a good place. Sandra and I have been part of his Bible studies for a long time, but every time we offered one, we were there. And if you know Les, he can get more out of a 7-word verse than anybody I ever know. I mean, he can tell you chronology, he can give you context, he can give you implications, and speak for 20 minutes on 7 words. Then here's another way with fielding unnecessary Christian questions. He'll usually say to you, if it's not really a question it's really Christian, he'll say to you, there's about 3 or 4 ways of looking at this. If you choose number 1, there's pros and cons to that. And here's what they are. And so you go back over that, and he says, choose one. And he says, if you don't like that one, let's go to number 2. And so he goes, so by the time you get to 3, you hope somebody would withdraw the question. But, anyhow, if you ever get a chance to join Wes, he tries hard to tell you what God wants you to know about that Bible. And Sandra and I are going to miss those occasions. Thank you. Oh, I forgot some. I forgot some of the comments that I heard in those discussions. Now, I don't know if you believe these or not. and Eve were created from an apple tree. Noah's wife was called Joan of the Ark. Lot's wife was a pillar of salt by day, but a ball of fire by night. Samson played the Philistines with the axe of the apostles, who slayed the Philistines. The seventh commandment is, thou shalt not admit adultery. Moses died before he ever reached Canada. Solomon, one of David's sons, had 300 wives and 700 porcupines. So you never know what you're going to hear when you go to one of these discussions.
Just to be clear, I never said any of that.
So far, I don't think you've done any of these things, or you've been there, so according to
I
you.
don't know. You gotta make up what you want.
Thanks to Wes.
Perhaps you have.
All right, let's keep this right. Protection up here. Thanks to Wes, our Bible studies of both the Old and New Testament this past COVID year were presented by Emmaus online, which was wonderful. These two guys know this stuff backwards and forwards, and you felt like you were up against the wall, and they spit words out faster than you could hear them, and it was an amazing amount of information. It was a great experience. We learned a lot. But best of all, Wes went the extra mile, and he was kind enough to meet with us each week following the lesson, either online or in person, for discussion on the material that was covered, and giving us a more complete picture, perspective, and answering our questions. So we appreciate that. Sunday School for Children continues to be a very high priority in this church. Carlann, who coordinates his ministry, has some comments to share.
I guess the first thing you did, Wes, was you built a playground down by the road that made it look like children are welcome here, which they are. And I would just say that doing Sunday school over these years, these past 7 years, in particular with your children, has been a real gift to me. I learned a lot from them, and they will be greatly missed, you three. All I can say is thank you for the children that you brought, your encouragement in children's ministries, and all of the wonderful things we were able to do. And Laura, for the chapel in the back of the rectory, just a very sweet thing. And we have a nursery, so we are all equipped. You have left us with all of the things that we need to minister to children in the future. So thank you, and I know where you're going, you kids. I will find you.
Music, which is an important part of our services, is offered by music volunteers who, by the way, we don't really play the organ. I don't know if you know that. We're not up here playing. Joanne selects our music and programs the pre-recorded music, and we try to play at the appropriate time. It's provided the service goes in a normal order. Thank you, Dawn. And speaking of Dawn, Dawn has some thoughts on this.
And so I am not musically inclined at all, but I just have a heart to be engaged, and so I volunteered to do music duty. Back then, we had an organ that you played with a floppy disk, and later in my career, it kind of had a mind of its own, and, but you had to sit at the organ as if you were playing it to hit the button, and I always enjoyed the comments afterwards of, you did such a great job playing the organ. My favorite was when Wes forwarded me a blog that a visiting lady had put together. She visits churches all over, and Wes kind of forwarded the blog, and I know he was chuckling when he forwarded it, but it said the organist was adequate and played it appropriately. So I have to say, we all got a big laugh out of that. But music it calls you to have a closer connection to the service. You really have to pay attention to what's going on. And so as my time as music duty continued on, like, I would always look to Wes for cues, and you could always kind of get that little nod or, yes, good, or what are you doing? Or
this.
You know, you tried to play accordingly, but so I always would say a little prayer. I did it the same thing today. Lord, please just let this music go like it's supposed to, because I don't want it to detract from the service, you know. And I do think it adds so much, and I will miss that.
Another volunteer opportunity that arises during our services is the nursery. Barbara Malden, who has recently moved back home to Waynesville, coordinated the nursery schedule for us, and she has an interesting memory to share with you.
Yeah, I was asked to do the nursery, and I was happy to do that. We got to move over to the rectory, to our new classroom. And I was just thinking about age. Of course, I don't worry about my age, you know. I'm going on 39.
I need to go see the doctor.
So I was wondering if I could get down up out of the floor after I was playing with the kids. I'll have to check that out. But I will say one thing, we were always looking for new babies, new children. And I'll ask West if he was interested in providing us with another kid, baby. He nipped that in the bud. But we will miss you, Wes. I've missed you for over a year, and I wish you all the best, all the family.
Thank you.
We had a healing service on Wednesdays. Maddie Decker, who can't be here this afternoon, made this observation. I'm quoting her. What a joy to be able to experience the communal prayers together when we could place hands on each other as we prayed for each other and for the needs of the community. I shall always remember this intimate and prayerful time. Another service that was enjoyed by many was the blessing of the animals. Westwood was quite open to taking up almost any animal that members brought, and one year we had a backyard sports family who brought a couple of goats. Wes didn't have any problem with that either. That was a wonderful blessing for us, and he also participated with PAWS, Pets Are Worth Saving, their organization in some of their fundraising events downtown and blessed animals. So thank you. With Wes's blessing, Crystal Morrison experimented with a Taizé service on several Sunday evenings. This is a candlelight prayer service, and here are her comments.
So when we had the idea, Lisa and myself and Maddie had gone to the candlelight service at Trinity in Asheville a couple of times and wanted to start one of the services here at our church, and it was in January of 2020. So after convincing Les that, you know, we could handle it, the service would be fine, he was under no obligation to either attend nor to facilitate the service. We started working on it, and we got started at the 1st of February. And we kind of built some momentum. We had found a musician who was willing to play. We had a guitarist. And about the middle of March, we had lined up a musician to play the flute. And we were ready for that Sunday evening. The guitarist and the flautist had been practicing online together. And this was way before we all got very familiar with how to facilitate meetings online. And so that Saturday, I got the text message from Les that the bishop was ending services on Sunday. So we had the conversation. Well, exactly for March 15th, could we have the services on the 15th and then be done afterwards, and how that was going to look. And of course, it came down that we were done at that point. So we had to reschedule, which to put off, and eventually at some point, I hope we get the opportunity to have flautist and guitarist and to redo the service. But Wes has always been incredibly supportive. The nice thing when anybody, I think, in the church has had ideas about things that we want to try or do for ministries or different activities, you've always been supportive and said, okay, run with it. I'm sure there were some limitations that you may not have supported, but it's a wonderful thing to be in a church where everything is open and supported, and so thank you.
mostly that I went to him when he first came and said, one of the things I really enjoyed were those last Wednesday dinners. And he looked at me and he said, great, make them happen. That's when I learned what it was gonna be like with Wes. That if you wanted something to happen, it was up to us, we're the church. And he made that very clear, and he has, in my opinion, left us a very strong church. Our family is strong, and we understand what ministry means, and as soon as we can get out from under COVID a little bit better, we're going to show Wes and everybody else that we are the church. And we'll be right back with Wednesday suppers and all these other ministries and your service that you just talked about here, and we're good to go.
Wes brought firewood ministry to us, which continues to this day. Most every Monday morning, Wes and several others, it might be family, it might be friends, it might be folks in the community, would come and gather together to take down trees that needed to be removed, which then provided wood to wonderful families who were needing it for heat, to keep them warm. No small task. In fact, we have somebody here who's Mark Hammond has a few words to say about working with firewood ministry. I think he worked with Wes a lot during COVID.
Like most of you, I assume, I met Laura and Wes at Transfiguration. But it was through the firewood ministry that I got to know Wes, and it was at school that I got to know Laura. And through those experiences, the two of you, I want you to know that it was your work ethic and your generosity that I will always remember about you. Of course, on those Monday mornings, one of the first things I appreciated about Wes is that he never asked me where I was on Sunday morning the day before. That was never a topic of conversation. And of course, handling chainsaws and axes and noisy splitters and so on and so forth, there's not an abundance of levity, but there were a few moments that we did share. You would be absolutely amazed at the insect life that you find in rounds of trees, rotted wood, and so on. Very, very interesting. Not quite as interesting as when Wes would then deposit those insects on Patrick's shoulder or arm or hat and watching Patrick's reaction. Wes used to poke fun at me for driving a Ford. He would poke additional fun at the cleanliness of my truck, and I had come to find out that it was because if you try to find anything in Wes's truck, you can find nothing because everything is in there. It's a feeling.
I know exactly where it is.
He does. And Carl Ann, maybe that's why he always told us to try to go find it, because we had to learn for ourselves. Wes and I share also the never-ending saga of trying to understand Mike Boff. It's an ongoing challenge and will never end. The firewood ministry was at times very sobering because we came face to face with an awful lot of people in need. It was also very rewarding for the same reasons. Wes, I think that what I will remember most, though, about that ministry is that when the cutting and the splitting was done, we were always hauling and driving and delivering, and that's when the conversations took place. And I jotted down a few things that Wes and I and the others talked about. We talked about tools, we talked about education, we talked about history, the forest, we talked about human nature, navigating the partisan divide and the challenges that poses, kids, and we also talked about the limits of aid and assistance to people and how we struggle to know how much to give, how much to offer, and when to stop. Wes, I have to tell you, you remind me of a Thomas Huxley quote: everyone should learn something about everything and everything about something. And you call to mind that concept of a Renaissance man, which I don't know exactly when I came to be aware of that, but I remember it struck me immediately that would be a goal in life. I think you carry that. You're my kind of person in the sense that I am very, very lousy at small talk. I like to talk about ideas rather than people and events, and I had that with you. I'm also struck by how too often so much is left unsaid until someone is about to move away or passes. So just in the nick of time, I want you to know that you have enriched my life and that of my wife, and I know so many others. It's been my privilege to know you, And I'll keep an eye on Boff, but it's not gonna do any good.
Thank you. George, a lot of people call Mr. D. George Desjardins is in Connecticut visiting with family that he hasn't seen in over a year. But he sends his comment. I was lucky enough to be involved with firewood and backyard sports, plus assisting Wes at the 8 o'clock service. Wes and I both shared a love of trout fishing, and he gave me some lessons on fly fishing. He will be missed. Okay, we're gonna test your memory again, Wes. Another Saturday morning workshop resulted in the creation of several new ministries based on perceived needs of our congregation. Wendy Field, who's moved to Charlotte and cannot be here today, she and Jim, describes 2 of them and Wes's role in their creation. At the beginning, M&M, which they decided was mature and motivated, I thought it should be magical and mischievous, and caring friends were just pipe dreams. Wes listened to a jumble of ideas and after consideration suggested I check with other churches to determine what they might be offering. Then came the mission statements, more questions, details to be covered, and committees formed to coordinate these programs. When we were finally up and running, Wes stepped back and left it to those involved to continue on. He stayed involved. He attended a good number of the M&M programs. He was a fierce Scrabble competitor. To anybody
Never
jealous?
lost.
Well, that's not what they all said.
They laugh.
And no surprise, he captained a pontoon boat on several occasions on our Chuck Watkins Lake Lure cruises every spring and fall. Wes also attended Laura's excellent program on bees and beekeeping. He refused to attend